call this meeting to order and grant permission to the Westwood Media Center to film. Is there anyone else who would like to film? Seeing nobody, we'll all rise to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Howard, I have you on speaker.
And we have some remote participation. Howard Messing can't be with us tonight, but especially since he's chair of the municipal subcommittee, he wanted to join us. So he is on the phone, and Jane needs to take a roll call.
Please. Barb,
Here?
Bill,
Just say here.
Here.
Cindy,
Here.
Jim, Lauren,
Here.
George,
Here.
Angela,
Here.
Peter,
Peter's here.
please.
When Peter's here.
Caitlin,
Here.
Tom,
Here.
Diane,
Here.
Howard. Great. Chris
Present.
and Mike.
Here.
Thank you, guys.
And Peter Lentz is not here.
Yes, I've got him.
So we are having our budget presentations tonight. And first we're hearing from Emily Parks and Lemma Jean-Baptiste. And I guess, is Tony going to join you or not?
Sure.
Great. All right.
So you have presented your budget to the school committee. And at what point are you going to be voting?
Well, so we have our public budget hearing at the school committee this Thursday,
Okay.
and presumably we'll vote following that.
Okay. So, and I know that our subcommittee has already met with you as well. So,
Yes. Great.
Anyway, so welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk with you tonight. So I have given you the slides here, and the plan is for me to sort of start things off and talk about the operating budget, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lemma Jean-Baptiste, who is our Director of Business and Finance, and she'll say a few things about the capital budget and kind of bring it into the finish. So I'm presenting the FY21 proposed operating budget tonight. We feel good about this budget. We think that it is a responsible, sustainable budget that also is allowing us to make some progress on some things and to move our priorities forward. We have been collaborating with the town through the budget steering process. And this budget was developed with the input of our district leadership team. I'm very lucky. I work with some wonderful, wonderful people. So our proposed budget, you can see here on the screen, we're proposing a 3.6% increase over FY20. And, you know, schools are really people-driven organizations. So when we think about what comprises this increase, mostly it has to do with salaries. About 87% of our operating budget is for salaries. This kind of makes sense. We're all about putting teachers with kids in classrooms. And so that's a major driver for us. And just meeting the contractual obligations that we have with our bargaining units is sort of the primary thing that we think about when we start to build the budget. So I have a chart here that shows you the proposed budget broken down by categories, and it's really sort of another look at what I just said, that really the bulk of the operating budget is for salaries. You can see that though the proposed budget is a 3.6% increase overall, the incremental change in the salary line item this year is actually 4.5%. And I just wanted to say a little bit about that. I think that when you look at the salary line item and then also the special education non-salary line item, it may be a little confusing what's happening there. So I need to emphasize that the special education costs are not decreasing, but what is reflected here is that we have made a decision to move about 1.5 FTE from contracted services. So this is, we currently have some physical therapy, some OT, some speech and language, and some reading services that are provided by contractors through a vendor. That sometimes makes sense when the number of hours that you need doesn't really rise to the level of having a district employee, or when the service is just highly specialized. That we've looked at that situation and think it's time to bring 1.5 FTE from the contracted services line into a district employee line. So some of the increase that you see in salary and that decrease in non-salary special education is actually no change in dollars. It really reflects about $125,000 being moved from non-salary to salary. And we think that that actually will allow us to provide more service for the same dollars. Just a little bit more about what comprises the salary increase, because there are a couple of things that are unusual for FY21, and we had a good conversation with the subcommittee about this. So when we think about salary increases, the first thing we have to do is account for our contractual obligations. When thinking about the teacher contract, which is clearly sort of the bulk of what we're looking at here in our budget, there are really three variables that impact teachers' salary. So they get step increases. There's also a negotiated COLA on the scale. And then teachers can also make what are called lane changes. That's based on sort of acquiring additional education and graduate credits. And so those three things together get factored in. So we first took a look at that, and you can see that's about $1.3 million. We're proposing some new positions, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we also had some positions that were incorporated into this year's budget after the budget was finalized, and that had to do with some changes in enrollment that happened over the summer and some special education needs. So we need to incorporate those things into the budget as well. Those are sort of all the typical things that happen, and that would be about a 3.8% increase. But there are two things that are unusual for this year. The first I just talked about is the transfer from non-salary to salary. So that's sort of inflating this percentage this year. And the second has to do with something that we changed in the teacher's contract when we bargained last spring. So these lane changes, what typically happened is that teachers would sort of return from the summer and they would inform us that they had earned the credits to make a lane change. So those were unanticipated, and we historically then needed to sort of backfill those into the base when thinking about level services going forward, which is a tricky thing to budget for. So we now have a provision where they inform us in advance about anticipated lane changes, which we think is really going to be helpful for our budgeting going forward. So we're in a tricky year this year where we are sort of doing a double whammy where we've got both systems. We have to backfill for FY20, and we know what our lane changes are anticipated to be this year. So that's a little bit strange for FY21, but that should normalize by next year. So we also take a close look at enrollment when thinking about our needs for the upcoming year. Enrollment is something we've been talking about with this group the last couple of years. That's kind of been the story of the budget. This year, actually, our enrollment seems to be fairly stable. We're really not anticipating many changes at each level. And so you'll see that in this budget, we have no proposed general education positions that are related to changes in enrollment. We are proposing keeping staffing levels the same. And kindergarten is, a little bit tricky to forecast. So we're keeping elementary staffing at the current levels, and we'll be making decisions about how to allocate that staff once we have more certainty in those enrollment numbers. We do, of course, always take a look during the budget process at what's on the horizon for enrollment. So I just thought I would share this information with you. We've been talking the last couple of years about sort of an enrollment bubble that's been coming through the district, where the elementary enrollment has been declining for about 10 years, and the secondary enrollment's been increasing. And that curve is starting to turn. So we sort of reached the low point for elementary enrollment, and now it's projected to start increasing, and the secondary enrollment has started has started to decrease. So we're keeping our eyes on that and thinking about what that means over the next several years. The other trend that we're keeping a close eye on is special education. As you know, special education in a school budget is sort of the most variable part of the budget because special education needs are so closely tied to what specific students need according to their IEPs. So we've been looking at some things that feel like trends to us. The 4 things I have here on the screen are things that we're really hearing about consistently from teachers and also from principals. They were very strong themes in the budget process. So we're seeing an increase in preschool age students who have some significant and often kind of complex needs, both in terms of sort of learning disabilities, sort of medical complexities. We are seeing an increased need for therapeutic programming, particularly for elementary age students who have emotional and behavioral challenges. We have an increased number of students in our transition program for students ages 18 to 22. So in special education, students remain eligible to stay with us until they're 22. So we do a lot with in this transition program in terms of getting kids prepared for jobs or maybe supporting them through community college. And then finally, we're seeing an increased need to respond to students who are experiencing acute mental health issues who maybe need a short-term out-of-district placement. So I share those only because they really influenced our thinking in terms of how we built this budget. So just some information here. In FY20, about 17% of students in Westwood receive some type of special education services. Special education comprises about 26% of the overall budget. And I don't think that seems particularly unusual. One of the things that we really work hard at is this last bullet, that less than 1% of Westwood students are educated in out-of-district placements. And I would say that first and foremost, that really reflects our value, that we believe we want to educate kids in their home communities as much as possible. Our ability to do that means that we have to have very strong in-district special education programs to support a wide array of needs. And then at the same time, we know that the cost of tuitions and the related transportation continues to rise. So it is, in fact, cost effective when we can keep kids in district. But when we keep kids in district, we also have to provide a much more robust district-based extended school year program in the summer. So we're sort of a 12-month operation at this point. We have students whose IEPs require that they continue their education in July and August. And just by way of comparison, this is something I think the subcommittee was curious about. If we just look at some of our surrounding communities, I think what you can see is that our out-of-district rate is actually quite low. And that's something that we're quite proud of. We've really worked very hard over more than a decade to build out these in-district programs. So these are our proposed staffing additions and changes. The first 2 are related to things that are in our strategic priorities. So we're proposing adding a 0.5 FTE middle school literacy specialist so that we can continue a reading intervention program that we began piloting this year. We're proposing a part-time 0.4 FTE director of safety and security. That really is something that has come out of the security audit that the school department had done. We think we need somebody who can really oversee looking at sort of the ongoing review of our incident protocols, our emergency preparedness, to oversee kind of the ongoing training that needs to take place, and also to oversee the implementation of some of the audit's recommendations. And then the remaining positions are really related to those trends in special education that I mentioned. We would like to add 1.0 ABA tutor, that's applied behavioral analysis. This position, along with reallocating some of our current special ed staff, will allow us to increase the capacity of our elementary STAR program, which is our therapeutic program. We're proposing adding 3 instructional assistants, 1 to support known special education needs at the preschool, 1 to support the high school flex program, which is sort of the high school version of STAR, and then an instructional assistant to support the transition program for those 18 to 22-year-olds. And then the last line there is the move from contracted service to district employees that I spoke about before. So though it increases our FTE, it doesn't have any impact on the budget. The 9 non-salary changes, the significant issues, we're planning for a 3% escalation for known tuitions in special education. We are building a budget on known increases in transportation also. We have our transportation contract and we know what our expenses should be next year. And then just increases to various line items, such as instructional supplies. We've had a 3-year rollout of a new science program, and it turns out we need a lot more stuff for science than we used to, a lot of consumables. We're working on some things at the middle school in terms of scheduling, so we're working with a consultant there. That's it for operating. Turn over to Lemma for capital.
So I can walk you through our proposed capital budget, and in the first slide what you will see is a history of the last 5 years as well as the proposed allocations in the annual capital budget for FY21. But I flagged an important change in that, and this is that the town has made a significant and increased investment in our annual capital budget. And what this meant between FY19 and FY20, you'll see that the amount increased significantly, and we primarily invested it in HVAC and in repair and maintenance. So in prior years before FY19, we had deferred maintenance in some of our buildings, and this additional funding allowed us to start to catch up. So FY20 was one of the first years we do that, and we are proposing relatively in FY21 to keep things level, especially in HVAC and repair and maintenance. We expect the same amount of work there. We are making a change, so I highlight this in the next slide, on copiers and vehicles. So we anticipate a little bit less need for funding for copiers, just because we reviewed that and we think that our machines are in good shape, and we do need a replacement vehicle. One of our vehicles is 14 years old and really is reaching end of useful life. So that's our proposed capital allocation. There are a couple of other requests that are important to flag. One of them is the approval of the FY20 Chapter 70 Education State Aid allocation of $160,000. This was released in FY20, but happened after the spring town meeting, and because it wasn't available at that point, the town couldn't vote and approve it for use for schools. So this would have to be a vote at the next town meeting. The next one is an increase in the special education reserve account, and this is a request for $350,000. The proposal here came out of conversations in budget steering. We have looked to use that special education reserve account for unanticipated needs, typically for residential tuition or for some day tuitions that may not have been predicted in the prior year. And rather than request a larger increase to the operating budget, because these are unanticipated, we don't know what will happen, we felt that the reserve account might be the right mechanism to provide the funding there in case the need arises. The final 2 things here are requests for additional capital items. The first is an additional $150,000 for continued security upgrades. We received $100,000 from the town last year, and we also applied for and received funding in the amount of $60,000 through a grant for security work. A lot of that, well, all of that has been spent between work on changing of locks as well as cameras and some call buttons, lots of physical improvements in our buildings to improve security overall. And we do have additional items that we'd like to tackle, and so this budget would allow us to do that. And then we are also requesting $150,000 to complete the Thurston Middle School HVAC univent project. This is an attempt to change about 30 univents at the middle school that have really aged. And we are about a third of the way through that project, but we do anticipate we need another 150 to get through to the finish line. There were a lot of conversations in this budget process, and some of them were difficult, and it was, we never can fund everything that we want to fund. So this last slide is just an attempt to recognize that there were some things, and they're listed here roughly in order of priority, but there are some things that we really would have liked to do and we might think to do in future years. And on here is a investment in the change in increasing the capacity of the peer special education program, additional funding for our special education contracted services line. There was a request for additional literacy support at the middle school, as well as some more support to handle new compliance needs for English language learners. So a smattering of things here, and there's more, but we thought that it was important to highlight that there were some things that didn't make it into the list. And finally, looking at how Westwood compares, this slide speaks to our per pupil spending, and what is on the horizontal axis is the Boston Magazine Top 25 High Schools for 2019. The per pupil spending amounts on the y-axis here, this is the 2018 district per pupil spending for those towns. And so you'll see Westwood is the green star. We're right about in line with the median in this cohort, and we think that that's a fair representation that we are relative to the results or the achievement that our students are doing, investing our funds well.
Speaking of that, so I put a bunch of things up here. I just thought I would end by bragging a little bit, just to demonstrate the value that we're getting for our investment here. We're very pleased about our outcomes and all of our programs. So, you know, the arts, athletics, performance. But I thought I would highlight that we were ranked by U.S. News and World Report as the 13th best high school in Massachusetts this year. 4 of our schools have received commendations from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education this year. We're going to be at a ceremony in May where we're going to be celebrated. And of course, the Downey Elementary School is a 2019 National Blue Ribbon School, so we're very proud of that as well. So things are going well here in the Westwood Public Schools. We'd be happy to take questions.
Any questions?
I have a question if I
Cindy?
could. I'd like, just about the vehicle. So is that for a new vehicle? What kind of vehicle is this going to be? What's it going to be used for? How is it going to impact students?
So we're looking for, this is a vehicle that's used by our operations department. We actually have 2 that are aging, so this would be one of them, and it's used by the operations staff. So as they report to schools and take care of maintenance issues on a day-to-day basis, they need a vehicle to get around in. And I know this year we've been like just holding on, and we recognize that there's a need to replace that, but honestly we could foresee a need to replace another one soon. So this one is a truck, but we do have a van as well. So we have both that are in need.
So you're planning on purchasing a new truck?
Yep.
Then, and in terms of mileage per year, like what kind of mileage per year do you put on a truck?
That's a good question. I don't think it's a lot of mileage. I think at this point it's just that the age and the wear and tear of the vehicle. I mean, it is, we do lug, equipment and supplies in there, so it might also be just the body of the truck has started to fail.
Okay.
Anything else?
Just one comment, just make sure everyone votes for our elementary school student who was picked by NASA as one of the 9 finalists to name
The Mars rover.
the Mars rover.
Yes, her nomination is Promise. And if you go online, you can read her essay, which I found inspirational. So I suggest you take a look.
I think the voting is over.
I think the voting may have closed, but we're waiting to hear the
Vote
results.
early and vote often.
Right.
Off for you, yeah.
Right.
Okay, anything else?
I have a question.
Yep.
For the chart that looks at in-district versus out-of-district placements, why were these other towns chosen to compare to?
Well, so most of them are in tech, which is the cooperative that we belong to, and so that tends to be sort of our comparison district. But to be honest, the thing that generates this only allows you to choose 10 comparisons, and there are actually 17 towns in tech. So I basically went with our neighbors, sort of geographically. And then I think, as I recall, I threw in Lexington, just because occasionally we have comps that, so I wouldn't say that Lexington is actually comparable to Westwood, probably on any metric, you know, demographically or size. But it just does really well. So sometimes we like to see how we're doing in comparison to schools that have really good outcomes.
Anything else? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
And
great.
Next time we meet, we'll be hearing from Diane and her subcommittee.
All right, thank you.
Review of your review. Okay, and now we have Pam Dukeman, Assistant Town Administrator and Finance Director, who is going to make a presentation on the municipal budget. Heavy budget this year.
And Chris Coleman would be here tonight. There is another meeting in town that he's attending, so he normally would be doing the municipal budget also. So we'll go through the municipal budget first. I know all of you have received the document. I know the subcommittee members have started to meet with the department, so we'll just kind of go quickly through some of the slides from the municipal book. So starting out just talking about what does the municipal budget provide for. One of the great things about the municipal budget is the wide variety of services that it provides. It really reaches out the departments to all areas of town, all ages in town, young and old. That's also one of the challenges, trying to spread the budget to all of those departments that are providing such diverse services throughout the community. The majority of the budget is public safety and public works, 65% of the budget. Really, police and fire, our public safety, are our main core service, about 45% of the budget, then supplemented by DPW, all of the road maintenance, building maintenance, field maintenance, 20% of the budget. But then we provide all of these programs and services, again, for all ages throughout town, young and old, through the Council on Aging Department, our library department, recreation. A lot of services and programs out there on the front line, touching residents every day. We have some departments that deal with state-required regulatory issues, our zoning, health, licensing departments, veterans departments, administering state veteran program, and then finally our administrative departments, accounting and HR and legal, those departments. So again, about 65% of the total budget on DPW and public safety, 35% on all the other departments. Just looking further at the budget request, $21.6 million for FY21, $745,000 or 3.5% increase over the current year. This chart breaks down by functional area, how the funds are spent. And again, in yellow, public safety, followed by public works, the largest areas of spending in the budget. The next slide looks at the growth of the municipal budget over the last several years, with the line graph on the top and then the chart on the bottom that shows the actual growth in percentage for each year. It's been relatively moderate growth over the last several years. The Select Board has strived to have a sustainable budget each year. In addition, and we'll see at a later slide, we have used separate additional university station funding, particularly for staffing increases in the public safety department. The increase for FY21, 3.57%. The municipal budget must, like the school budget is salary-driven. 78% of our total cost is in salary line item. So the majority of our spending is on our staffing. And our primary service delivery is through our staff, particularly our police officers, firefighters, and DPW workers. So of the $21 million, $16.9 million in FY21 would be in the staffing line. Again, about 78%, with just over $4.7 million in expenses. So on the next slide, looking how is that salary budget changing from FY20 to 21. The salary increase, $523,000, or a 3.2% increase. The chart on the bottom shows any particular items making up that increase of the $520,000. Again, much like the schools, our salary and our staffing requires contractual obligations and various increases, including cost of living adjustments, step increases. That's really the bulk of the salary increase for FY21, about $490,000. We have two smaller items that are continuations of things in the current year. One, the teen librarian was funded in FY20 on a part-time basis. After several attempts to try to staff that position and hire for part-time, they were unsuccessful. The library came back to the select board, and through a series of discussions, were approved to fill that on a full-time position, full-time basis, which they have now done, and that's been very successful. There's about a $15,000 cost in the FY21 budget to carry forward that impact of the full-time. And then similar $15,000 for two other positions in departments that had position upgrades in the current year, the cost of pulling those upgrades forward into FY21. So really, the main change in the staffing is the contractual obligations for salary increases. There are no new positions included in the FY21 budget. So that's on the salary side. The next slide looks at the expense side of the increase. So the proposed expense budget for FY21, $4.7 million, a $222,000 increase, or 5% increase in expenses. The chart at the bottom just shows where some of the increase in expenses is coming from. It's a pretty varied list. And there's more detail in the municipal book. But the largest increase is coming in our building maintenance. We now have the new police and fire buildings up online, fully incorporated into the budget. The select board are committed to maintaining those buildings at a high quality. We will not let those, they're beautiful brand new buildings, and those, along with the library and our other buildings in town, we want to make sure we're properly maintaining those. So that is where you see the largest expense increase. Other smaller increases because of what's happening during the year. Town clerk, it's a busy election cycle year, so $9,500 increase in that department, as well as in the DPW, some additional expenses for stormwater compliance and some field maintenance. I just want to look on this slide at our public safety staffing. This has been the major area of change over the last several years in the municipal budget. And some of our longer-term FinCom members remember a couple of years in our budget process where we talked at significant length about our public safety staffing levels. At the onset of the University Station project, there was a lot of discussion about the impact that project would have on public safety positions in town and our service delivery. And part of that discussion was looking at, were we at appropriate staffing levels even without University Station coming online. We spent a significant time looking at that. We have, with the University Station funding, been able over a number of years, starting in FY14, been able to add 23 public safety positions to the municipal budgets. So the two charts there show the position change for police and then fire. We've added 14 firefighter positions, 7 police officers, 1 new dispatch, and 1 communications center director, the head of dispatch. These positions were not added all at once. It was a very kind of slow buildup over a number of years. One, the select board was looking at the impact of University Station and making sure that it did require additional staffing. And also, you really can't add all new positions all at once to public safety. They just can't hire and train and incorporate positions in those departments. So it's been kind of a very gradual buildup. But again, this has been the biggest change in the municipal budget over the last several year period. So not only have these positions helped us to do the proper service delivery and deal with the impact of University Station, but it has significantly enhanced the service delivery in the public safety departments to all residents in town. So it's certainly, and again, for those members who were here when we were having those discussions, it's certainly good to be on the other side of that effort, and not that we'll always continue to look at appropriate public safety staffing levels, but at this point, there's been a significant investment in those departments. The select board will look each year at the needs. There are no new positions, as I said before, in the FY21 budget proposal.
Pam, quick question. That FY13 uniform staff under the fire, was that at full complement then, or were they short-staffed?
That was the positions.
Oh, those were the positions.
Those are the positions. So we've gone from 30 uniformed fire positions FY13 to 44 in the current year. So a significant increase.
I know we've had an issue with, well, we have the positions, we haven't had the people in the positions. I see Chief Decker's here, but I'm also talking about the police. Do we still have positions that have not been filled?
They are right at the tail end of having full-filled positions.
Oh, good.
But that has been a challenge, not only for Westwood, but for communities across the state, filling police and fire positions.
Yeah.
And again, as I mentioned, you can't bring all new positions on at once. Those positions are just different. They're required to go out, get training before they really come on board and are active members of the force. At the same time, they're adding new positions. They've had kind of the normal retirement kind of roll-off. So just as soon as they kind of hire into the new positions, they might have a vacancy because of a retirement. So it's been a lot of work by both chiefs over the last couple of years, and I believe they're down to really kind of the final openings that they're filling. Is that fair to say?
Pam, is there a model they use to determine what the required staffing levels are? How did they come to that number?
Yes. And as I mentioned before, when the University Station project was coming online, the Select Board, in working with the Finance and Warrant Commission, hired consultants to go and evaluate the departments, make recommendations as to what the appropriate staffing levels should be for a town our size with the issues we have. You all know we're a little bit different, that for a town our size, our geographical layout is very different and challenging, and that particularly impacts the public safety departments. So it was looking at the appropriate levels even before University Station, and then what the impact from University Station would be. And when I go into the next budget piece and we look at the University Station funding, you'll see how we use that funding to pay for this. But it really has been the most significant change in the municipal budget over the last couple of years. And again, nothing for FY21, but that's not to say you may not see things in the future. And then finally, just looking at some things that the departments will be focusing on going forward. Continue the challenge of trying to maintain a high level of service to the community. With some of the change in housing that we're seeing, with the new condos coming online, different type of housing than the town has had before, departments are trying to adjust to that. So even things like the library, trying to make sure they reach out and can get the same kind of services to those new members of town as they do to current residents. As I mentioned, continue to monitor the public safety staffing levels. That is something the select board continues to work with both chiefs closely on that going forward. The facilities, high priority to make sure that we're maintaining these new buildings at a proper level, as well as starting to continue the planning for any new facilities or other upgrades coming down the line. So nothing in place for FY '21, but again, that maintenance budget in '21 has been increased to make sure we're bringing our new buildings online. The project currently undergoing over in Islington, moving the Wentworth Hall Library and adding a new community room there. That'll be our next building that we'll have to incorporate and roll into our facilities maintenance program. And then trash and recycling. I only touched on it because we touched on it last time we were here. I think when your subcommittee meets with Todd, you'll hear a great deal more, but that whole industry is changing. That is a real struggle for us right now. The recycling line item in the budget went up 22%. It's not something unique to Westwood, it's statewide. The whole recycling industry is changing. What we used to get paid for to recycle, paper and different things, now no one pays us, and now we can't even give certain things that we used to in recycling. We will be looking in the year ahead about, do we have to change our whole trash and recycling service delivery? So we currently have single stream where you can put everything into one recycling bucket, and that may be changing because again, the industry is changing. We're not really going to be able to operate the same as we have. And one thing we've pointed out before, but not every town that we compare ourselves to offers trash delivery pickup service. Needham, Wellesley do not. So we kind of have to remind that we're paying for that within the tax levy. It's a real different service that, again, we're paying for that within the tax levy where other communities we compare ourselves to are not. And it's almost becoming a budget buster like we had years ago with health insurance. So you'll be hearing a lot about that over the next year. And I think that's it on the municipal budget.
So we pause for any questions? Any questions? You're off easy this time, but not really, because then you have to do the comprehensive town budget.
So now I'm going to go through the overall budget. I know we sent out to everyone the overall budget summary book. And so really what I'm going to go through are some selected slides from that book. I just want to mention first in the book what we have in there. The first section of the book is the specific budget proposal for FY21. So just a couple of slides that go through exactly what's being proposed for FY21 on the expenditure side, operating budget and capital, and then what's being proposed for the revenue to support those expenditures. The second section we call Info to Know, and that section really has a lot of detail on the revenue and expenditures. So that's a section where we go into great length to look at things like our tax levy, how Prop 2.5 works, our tax bill, state aid, University Station. There's several slides in there about how much has come in and how we've used the money, our debt budget, stabilization funds, all of that. So really a lot of good background information to our overall finances and what's supporting the 21 budget. And then the third section, we actually pull the summaries from the municipal book, the school book, the capital budget, and our fixed cost, and put those in the back. So that essentially you really just need this one book to kind of go through the process. So I do want to point out at this point, we do have a balanced budget that's being proposed. I'm going to go through a few slides tonight from the summary book and just show you the different pieces of the budget. And then I want to point out, we'll come back before your final public hearing at the end of March. and there'll be some updates to different budget items. Anything that changes, we're going to present to you as a change from what you have in the book. So we kind of work that way where the book is balanced, we're showing you revenue and expenditures. We'll come in before the end of March, show you any changes from that. And then that's the budget that you'll be asked to vote. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go through a few slides that are in that book. I'm going to start on the expense slide. So this slide shows our overall total expenditures, all area, for FY21. $106 million, a 3.8% increase from the prior year. So this was the number, Chris, you were looking at the last meeting for the over $100 million. Just quickly, on the table, it shows by category. So just walking down the category. Obviously, our biggest piece of the spending is the operating budget. $98 million for FY21, overall a $3.6 million increase or 3.9% increase over the current year. Next, all of our capital budget articles, $5.2 million. Right now, that's about a $490,000 increase or 10% over the current year. The next line, $1.5 million, is our OPEB appropriation and our appropriation into our stabilization fund. So really kind of our liability and compliance categories, a $25,000 increase over the current year. The next line is any of the articles we do to deal with the prior year or current year budget when we get to town meeting, Article 1 and 2. And then sometimes there are other articles at town meeting that have a financial impact. Right now, we do not have any of those. So the line that has $99,000 in FY20 and then 0 in FY21, when we come back in mid-March with the Article 1 and 2, so the budget supplements for the current year, we'll be filling that in. And then finally, the other amount to be raised, $1.2 million in FY21. So that's a series of items, and there's detail in the budget book on that, but those are the series of items that do not get voted at town meeting, but that we're required to set aside money in our budget for by the state. So $1.2 million, and really it's made up of two items. One is state charges. So the state gives us state aid every year, but they also charge us about $700,000 for various charges and assessments. And then the other item is our overlay account. We're required to set up an account to provide for any exemptions or abatements we give against our tax revenue. And that's about $500,000. So that last item there, again, is not voted at town meeting, but it has to be part of our overall budget. So then the next couple of slides, we'll just look at some of those expenditure items. The stabilization fund, $125,000 appropriation from free cash into the fund. We looked at this at your last couple of meetings, so I won't say too much more on that tonight. That just keeps us in compliance. We currently have about $3.3 million in that account. It's important for our credit rating. This is kind of protection. This is the emergency reserve account for the town, and we have a healthy balance in that account. The next slide, page 15, is the appropriation for the OPEB liability, $1.465 million. The bar graph shows our annual appropriation over the last several years. So through two major changes in our healthcare plans, we've been able to build into the ongoing budget an appropriation level that really is meeting our liability requirement. We are currently on a funding schedule to increase this by $25,000 each year, and so the FY21 appropriation continues along that funding schedule. Next, looking at the operating budget. So the $98 million, again, the largest portion of our overall spending. This chart shows the different categories of spending of the operating budget. So just walking down those categories, the school operating budget, $48 million that you just heard. That's by far the largest piece of the operating budget. The $160,000 additional supplement for this year for FY21 for the schools, and Lemma went through that in the earlier presentation. $21.6 million for the municipal operating budget. The Blue Hills assessment, I just want to point out here, $159,000, $10,000 increase, or 6%. Right after we went to print with everything with our budget, we got an updated assessment from Blue Hills, and that's a number you're going to see change when we come in March. It's actually going to come down. The assessment is actually going to be flat with no increase. This was an earlier number they had given us, and again, it was right after we went to print where they gave that to us, but you will see that come down. Traffic supervisors, $116,000. We list that separately only in the Appendix D that's voted in town meeting. It's in the school category. We list it separate here so that it's not mixed in that school number because you're looking directly at the school budget. Fixed costs, $17.6 million, $1 million increase, or 6%. And we're going to look at what makes up that in one of the next slides. Debt service budget, $5.9 million, and then $4.4 million for sewer. And all of our sewer operates as a sewer enterprise fund, so all of the sewer costs are funded by the sewer user fees. So $98 million, again, 3.6 million, or 3.8% increase. And the pie chart at the bottom shows that the school budget and municipal operating budgets are the largest portion of our overall spending.
A quibble about this table. Debt service shouldn't be listed as part of the operating budget. So the operating budget really went up by 4.3%. It's a little bit more. In your table on page 13, in your pie chart, you break out the debt separately from the operating expenses, which is the way it should be done. So this table is,
Yeah.
I would suggest that in future versions of this, that debt service be taken out. But the real operating expenses are going up by 4.3%,
Yep.
not 3.89.
Yep.
But including it there does reduce that number a little bit, but that's, but it really should be separated. But it's
Yes.
it's
I understand
suggestion.
your point, yep. We do this, we show this all together here because that's how we voted at town meeting. That is all in the one article that kind of votes the annual expenses for each fiscal year. But I understand your point, Peter, yes, we can show that differently. So in the next slide, showing the pieces of that fixed cost and reserve category, $17.6 million. So the largest piece of that, the first line is the employee benefits, $14.6 million for FY21, an $886,000 increase, or 6.4% increase for FY21. That category includes benefits and payroll taxes for all employees, school and municipal. And really, that 14.6 is made up of three large items. Our pension assessment for our county pension will be $5.8 million in FY21, a 7% increase over the prior year. Our health insurance budget, $6.5 million, a 5% increase over the current year. And we've mentioned before, that is an estimate at this point. We will have our new health insurance rates from the state. We participate in the state group insurance commission program. That will come out in February and early March. So some years that's a number where you get an update before you vote the final budget. And then our Medicare payroll tax, just over $1 million, or 10% increase. Municipal and school employees do not contribute to Social Security, but they are required to pay a tax on their payroll so that they can participate in Medicare when they retire, and we have a match that we have to provide for also. So three items make up the bulk of that $14.6 million of the employee benefits. The next couple of slides look at debt. So it's been a very favorable climate for the town to issue debt over the last couple of years. We have excellent credit rating. The interest rates have been low. We've been able to issue debt that replaces debt that is dropping off or rolling off because it's ended. We had some significant bond sales. $10 million in 2015, $16.6 million in 2016. We have some debt authorized but not yet issued, meaning town meeting has approved debt that we've not yet gone out and issued long-term yet, $6.1 million. And that's for the $1.75 million of the school feasibility study, what the school is working off of now for their MSBA project, $3.5 million for the Islington project, essentially the Wentworth Hall moving and the new building, and then the $900,000 that was approved last year for the first piece of the road bond. So the school project and the Wentworth both have some revenue that will offset the total amount we will issue. So when we go out to issue, it won't be the full amount of the $6.1 million. Just looking at the town's total debt outstanding, this bar graph shows the outstanding debt at the end of each fiscal year. And I'll just highlight on the right, in FY20, on June 30th, we had $35.5 million in outstanding debt. And you can see how over the last couple of years prior to that, debt had spiked up higher when we issued new debt that I mentioned above, the two large bond sales, primarily for the police and fire station. But because we have not had any new debt since 2016, the total debt has come down. So we've been able to kind of absorb in all of that new debt, and we're really back down to the debt level that we were at in FY16. So looking at the debt budget, $5.9 million total that we need to make in principal and interest payments in FY21. And there's two components to our debt. So there's two lines there. The first one is exempt debt, and that's for any debt approved outside of the Prop 2.5 limits. And for us, that's the high school project and the library. So the debt in that category, $2.6 million in FY21. The second line item is non-exempt debt or debt within 2.5, $3.3 million in FY21. So this chart on the bottom of page 19 shows the rollout of the debt within Prop 2.5. So in green is the FY21 budget, $3.3 million. You can see in FY22, we've highlighted with an arrow that we have the bond ending. A previous bond, $4.6 million 10-year bond issued in 2012. We will make our last payment in FY22. And that was primarily a bond for road work and DPW equipment. So as we make that last payment, we have capacity in FY23 to bring in the new road bond that's proposed for town meeting approval this year. That debt will come in and replace this space within the debt budget, meaning we don't have to increase the debt budget to provide for that new bond. So that's the debt within 2.5. This next page does the same thing for the debt outside 2.5. $2.6 million in FY21, a decrease of about $107,000. That's just the natural decline in debt. Nothing's dropping off. It's just we pay less in interest each year on our bonds. Looking at the chart on the bottom, this shows for the debt outside of 2.5, what's our annual payments. The green shows our current net debt for FY21, $1.2 million. So the difference between that and the 2.6, we have to appropriate the full amount, $2.6 million for that debt. 1.2 is what the net amount is. The difference is what the state pays us for that high school project. The state contributes $1.4 million towards that debt. So you can see the over the next couple of years, the debt declines. We have an arrow over FY23 showing that that's the year we make the last payment on the high school bond. That was a 20-year bond. All of us remember that project and issuing that bond. Remarkable that we've reached the end of that. We'll make that last payment in FY23. And similar to what we just saw in the previous slide, you can see the drop down in FY24 as we finish the high school debt will allow us some space as we take on the new elementary school project to fit in there. That space does not absorb the whole elementary school project, but it will absorb the first piece. It will absorb the first portion of that new project.
When you
It
say
would fit in that
absorb,
space.
when you say absorb, it means that we won't feel the impact, but it still has to be voted outside.
It does
2.5.
have to be voted outside of Prop 2.5 to match that. But that first piece, instead of adding on to what we currently collect in taxes, would kind of replace what's dropping off with the high school. So I think it really is important for the community to know that we're ending a major obligation. The high school debt was the biggest debt the town had ever taken on, that we're ending that obligation in FY '23, right at the time that the next elementary project would come on. And I've said before, I think one of the most important things when we look at that is not just financially, but we're looking at the high school still feeling like a new building, and still being a beautiful community-wide building for the town. I know I feel old having issued that debt and now going to see it roll off, and it's a 20-year obligation. But anyway. Okay, moving on to the capital budget, and we've looked at these at your last couple of meetings, but just quickly, important to maintain our town buildings, facility, and equipment. We have a base capital each year, that's the main school and municipal article. The bar graph shows you that spending each year, and as was mentioned during the school presentation, we have been working to increase that level. Our financial policies say that should be about $2.4 million a year. We first reached that target in the current year, FY '20. We will continue at that level in FY '21. We had had many years where we were, not even a third of the way towards that target. So there are two base capital articles, the municipal article, 1.3 million, and the school article, just over $1 million. We have two other capital articles, a sewer capital each year. That's proposed at $765,000 for FY '21, and again, that's funded through the sewer user fees and retained earnings. And then a small amount, $64,000, that we keep as a separate article because we use specific revenue for that, and that's the ambulance revenue. So those are kind of the main base articles for capital. We've talked before and gone through that because we had been underfunded for many years in our capital budget, that we have tried to do better and not only raise the base capital, but kind of do an additional capital article. So since FY '17, we have had an additional capital each year. Part of that effort has been to make up for those years that we, were not at our target levels, and also to get at some larger projects that are hard to fit, that are hard for the municipal or schools to fit within their base capital. So the bar graph shows each year what that additional capital has been, and we are proposing to do that again in FY '21. So there currently are two capital articles. One, town and school projects, just over $1 million, funded with free cash, and a second article for some townwide recreation projects, just over $1 million, funded with the meals and hotel tax. So on this next slide, we have the detail of what those projects are. And we did look at that at your last meeting, and I know as you'll be meeting with departments, you'll be looking at these projects. But again, the first one is kind of some town and school projects, many of which are the second phase of items that were started in the current year. And then the article at the bottom, some recreation projects funded by the meal and hotel tax. The first item there, the $750,000, is the lighting project for the Thurston School field facility, and then $50,000 to continue the engineering and design on a recreation project for the land that was behind the high school tennis courts, that newly purchased land, and then $275,000 of some work at the pool. This is this capital article at this point in time. The select board is continuing to work with the departments in refining and updating this list. So you might see some change to this going before your March final public hearings, but they did want to get this forth to you so that you knew what was being considered. But again, they've been continuing to meet with the departments and look at these projects to refine what should be put forth this year to town meeting.
Barb, can I just?
sorry, go ahead.
On your design and engineering for the land behind the high school tennis courts, do you know what the plans are? I mean, usually we have an idea that we're gonna design for, looks like we're designing, but do we know what we're designing for?
Yes, so that's still being looked at, but if you remember at the last town meeting, there was $20,000 to start that project. So Recreation was able to have kind of a company come in and do an initial look at what could fit on that land. And now they'd want to go in and look at that a bit further. Can it be a full field? Parking spaces, can the parking be done in such a way that helps the high school, where the parking is so tight at the high school lot?
So if we narrowed it down, do you have any input on what it can be used for?
Sorry?
Can it be narrowed down? Do you have any input on what it can be used for?
I think I'm gonna ask, the rec came to the select board at their last meeting and went through some items, and we can get that to you to see what they're looking at.
Thank you.
Pam, can I just tag on to Jim's question? Regarding the new fields or what have you, are there any numbers that compare expense for regular grass fields versus a field turf field, and any maintenance expense that might be associated with that, and comparing the two?
Yeah. So as part of the analysis on both of those line items, they've been looking at what is the difference if it was turf or if it was field. So we'll make sure you look at that. And then part of the discussion also is with the new school elementary project, what fields might be incorporated into that project, depending on as they go forth and the siting is updated. Could there be additional fields laid out in those areas? So a lot of work right now. You all know the demand for field use in town. And so again, the select board is still working with REC and DPW on which of these makes the most sense to go forth at this point. They're trying to consider what fields might be coming offline if there are school projects going forward. When might the field at the old lodge come back online? So to try to line these up in a way that helps keep field use at least where it is now.
But they chose not to, what's the so-called practice field, they chose not to redo the turf on that field. The bigger priority was the lights in the other field?
Yes, the multi-purpose, what do they call that, right?
Yeah, multi-purpose.
Multi-purpose. We're not
It's called
supposed to call it the practice field, because I know a lot of teams, my daughters included, played on their varsity games. But the backfield behind the high school will wait another year before that gets redone. That's a turf field that needs to be redone, but that can wait until FY '22. And just finishing up on the capital, the road bond, $4.6 million, and you had heard from Todd Corchin came in and went through that with you, but that was the bond proposed last year. That one piece was done, and now this is coming back to do 109, crosswalk and safety improvements throughout town, as well as paving preservation and various sidewalks throughout town. $4.6 million. I just want to be clear, this is not sidewalks for Gay Street. It's other sidewalks previously planned. So this would be proposed as a borrowing authorization and would be issued as a 10-year bond within Prop 2.5. And as I showed you earlier, that would fit in when the previous bond drops off. And then finally, one large piece of DPW equipment, $325,000. We're proposing that as a borrowing authorization, and we could do that with the borrowing for the road improvement bond. So that's the expense side. And now just to look quickly at the revenue side. So this slide shows total proposed revenue for FY21. The matching $106 million budget, 3.8% increase. The first slide shows the total categories, and then the same as the expenses, we're going to look at a couple of them in more detail. But obviously, taxes are the largest component of our revenue. Almost 80% of our budget on revenue comes through taxes. $83 million in taxes. Just going down the chart, $6.6 million in state aid. That is the current budget as proposed by the governor. It's about a 3.8% increase over the current year. The next line, $1.4 million, is that state, the MSBA school reimbursement that I mentioned earlier. That $1.4 million goes directly against the debt for the high school project. We're not allowed to use it any other way. And that $1.4 million in revenue will end when the high school debt ends in FY23. $5.6 million for all of the sewer related spending, including operating and capital. $4.1 million local receipts, level funded from the current year. Available funds, $539,000, essentially level funded from the current year. Available funds that match any particular articles, that's $64,000 is the ambulance that we were looking at earlier. Proposing to use $1,075,000 from the meal and hotel tax, and then $3.5 million of free cash. So we're going to look at both of those. I do want to point out, on the revenue, when we look at available funds, the meals and hotel, and the free cash, this is the revenue we're proposing to use, not the revenue that we're expecting to be generated in those accounts. So the meals tax, we already have that $1 million on hand. That's not revenue that we're projecting to come in FY21. And that's just the way the state makes us do the revenue budget.
Pam, I'm curious, I know with the fire chief is going to get a swap buddy truck partially funded by a state grant, but that's not shown on here. Why don't we show grants on here?
Well, I didn't have the list when I showed the total town municipal capital. I didn't include that list because we had looked at it last time, but it is in the book there. So right now, we're only requesting appropriation of $20,000, which would be what we would need if we did get the grant.
I know, I guess, my question is, when we show the town all the money that we're planning on getting.
So we don't have that grant yet. He's going through the
But you don't usually show the
Questions.
grants. I mean, I know the schools get
Yeah.
a lot of grants and they
Yeah.
don't show
Is
them.
that an accounting rule that you don't show grants?
It's not a rule that we're not showing it, but this really is the budget that's voted at town meeting.
Town meeting,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so we do have other funds that are not approved by town meeting, special revenue funds, state grants, federal grants.
Barb, can you tell us how much are in these accounts, the meals account?
Yep, so I'm going to look at that in a
Coming
couple of
up,
slides if we
okay.
can, yep. So first, just looking at the tax levy, because that is obviously our main source of revenue. So we have looked at this chart before, but this is our particular calculation for what we can raise in revenue under Prop 2.5. So the rightmost column is the FY21 calculation. We start with the 79.7 million, which is just coming from our limit from the year before. We're allowed to increase that by 2.5%. That's the 1.99 million. We can then add estimates for new growth, $450,000 for kind of non-university station new growth, and $200,000 for university station. That brings our new limit to 82.3 million. The shaded line in the middle is the exempt debt, 1.2 million. That's the exact amount that we can raise that we need for principal and interest for the high school and library debt, again, net of any state funding. So that brings us down to 83.5 million, what we could tax. What's proposed in this budget is the next line in the circle, 83.3 million, so slightly less than the maximum, leaving us $200,000 of what's called unused tax levy. And that's the line we started to talk about at the last meeting. If you look at that line moving left we had unused levy in the current year of $800,000, just over $1 million in FY19 and FY18, $1.5 million in FY17. So each year for the last several years, we've had significant unused tax levy. So we're not taxing to the maximum that we could. The Select Board has deliberately tried to do that with each year's budget. And I want to point out the $200,000 number, we would anticipate by the time our actual tax levy is calculated, so when our actual new growth is known, that that number would be higher. That's our initial budget estimate. The bottom chart just shows a little bit more detail on that unused levy for the last couple of years. So there's a portion of the university station revenue each year, which the Select Board has purposely said we're not going to spend that and allocate that into the budget. And then a portion is coming from where our actual new growth is higher than what's estimated. And we have not had a general override since 2007, which really is pretty remarkable. That's a long period to not have that kind of general override, particularly when we have the school, a high-performing school system like we do, to not have to have an override to fund that. And really, one of the main reasons for that is the way the university station money has come in and helped to supplement that budget without an override. So that's the tax levy. I think, Peter, that was a question you had at the last meeting about the using the maximum amount of the taxes, and we've not done that for several years. Just quickly, another look at taxes. This is the slide where we look at the commercial percent of taxes. So of that tax levy, about 25% of that is paid by our commercial property. They only make up 15% of the town's value, but because of the split rate, they're paying 25% of the taxes. That really is a tremendous savings to our average homeowner, about $1,300 a year to the tax bill coming from that split rate. The next slide is another look at taxes. This looks at the average residential tax bill. So the light blue bar, the second bar over from the right, is the current year. That average bill is just over $9,500. Under this current budget, that would increase to just over $9,800 in FY21, an increase of $287 or 3%. This table in the middle of the slide shows what that increase has been for the last several years for that same home. So that tax bill on the top is for a home valued at about $660,000. So the chart shows the tax bill each year, the increase, as well as what is the subsidy each year from that split tax rate. And then finally, the little table at the bottom, we can go on the Department of Revenue website, and they have a listing of high to low tax bill ranking throughout the state. And so this just shows you for the last 6 or 7 year period what Westwood's ranking has been. In the current year, we're the 18th ranked tax bill in the state, and that's really where we've been consistently for a number of years.
Hey Pam, on the fiscal year 21 projected, the 9,863, so that's the average across the whole town? Or just based on a 660,000?
That's a great question, because at this point in the process, we can only show the increase as an estimate based on the estimated increase in total taxes.
Okay.
So it's approximately a 3% increase.
So
We don't really know the actual tax bills until, really next fall, because the actual tax bills are based on what happened with value, total value townwide, commercial value, and then your individual tax bill is based on what happened to your home's value. So there's a lot of things that go into the actual tax bill.
So when we look across the town, how does all the new condos they're putting in down at University Ave and their value being in the $500,000 to $600,000 range alter our average view? Because your volume is increasing at the
Yep.
lower end, so what does the number look like
Yep.
without the volume?
So this really, the 660 right now is our mean home value. So right in the middle. Our pure average home value is rising quite quickly because of the higher end homes coming online. Any of our new residential construction, except for the condos,
Yeah.
are, high, well, 1.6 to $2.5 million homes. So this still is kind of the mean home value in town.
Okay. Thank you.
Condos aren't that much below the 660, though. I mean,
Those
400, some of them
condos
400 to
sold
600.
really from high fives to $700,000. A little bit higher than what was first anticipated. And they are really, both of those buildings are all sold.
But that 3% does mean that the homeowner's property tax bills are going up by 3%. That's estimated currently. And that will be of particular interest to the homeowners and might be disappointing to many. Firstly, the number is bigger than the 2.5% limit that people might be expecting, even though this is within the, I understand it's within the rules. And the homeowners, the taxpayers were told that if they approved the University Station project, the tax bills would be lower. And we're getting another 3% increase in the tax bills. And there's an additional problem this year having to do with changes in the federal tax laws. For most of us,
Yep.
the 3% addition to your property tax bill will not be deductible on your federal returns. This makes it a bit more expensive than it has been in the past. But the homeowners, as you can see in this table, have been paying from fiscal year 18, the property tax bills went up by 4.6%, then 2%, then 3%, and another 3% this year. The homeowners might, I think, would prefer that the 3% be lower, perhaps 2% or 2.5% might be less objectionable to the homeowners.
Yep, I'd love to have a zero increase in the tax bill, but this is the revenue required to support the expense budgets that we went through. And just a couple of things. So Prop 2.5 is called that. We just saw the chart. That just limits the total amount the town can raise. It doesn't say that's what an actual bill is going to change at all. Every bill can change differently. It's the total limit on taxes. And, the University Station project, it was never presented that that would pull down taxes. I would never sit here and tell anyone that their tax bill is going to decline because it just, doesn't happen. Taxes are going to go up. I'm going to show you how in the next slides, how we've used the University Station money. Absolutely has kept the increases in our tax bills at this level. Without that money, we would have had significantly higher increases in taxes. Oh, and that's the next slide. If we can look at that, okay. So, and this is the slide you've seen before, and there's additional information in the summary book, but this is the funding from University Station. The little table at the top shows the additional new tax revenue each year coming online. In total, through the current year, FY20, $5.9 million in new revenue. The property before the development paid about $2 million. So in total, coming annually now from University Station, $7.9 million in taxes. So almost 10% of that total tax levy is coming from the University Station area. So $5.9 million in new revenue. The chart on the bottom we've looked at before. Before the project came online, all parties had discussions about trying to get that money out to as many areas in the budget process as we could. And the next slide, we're showing you how have we actually used that money. So that $5.9 million, almost half of it has been used to supplement the school and municipal operating budgets. $2.6 million, with about $1.9 million going to the school budget and $700,000 to the municipal budget. So you heard budget presentations tonight from the school and municipal. Even at moderate budget growth in the 3.5% range, that is hard for us to fund under Prop 2.5 when our tax increase is limited. This additional revenue has allowed us to fund the increases requested, again, in the school and municipal, primarily in the school budget, without the need for an override. So the school budget currently has within it, in the current year, almost $2 million in funding from University Station. So if that project hadn't come forth, we would have $2 million less in services and programs and teaching staff in the school budget. Or if the community desired that same level of budget, we would have had to go out to the community for an override. So when people say, what if we use the University Station money for? It's in our budgets. It's in our school budget, our staffing. So that's the largest piece that we've done.
And also, the increase in the schools, it wasn't matched by the increase in the student population as the same, like for the fire or police. As you said, the whole town has
Yes.
benefited.
And we have in the budget book by year how that money was factored in, and it will match. I know the schools have a chart in their budget that shows their budget increase over a number year period, and they clearly identified. They had a couple of years where the budget increase was over 4%, I think a high 4. And they clearly say that was the year that we got some additional revenue from University Station. The second piece of the funding, $1.9 million, is to help mitigate the direct service costs of the project. So again, when the project was coming online, we knew we would need to service that it would have impact on our services, particularly public safety. So in this category of $1.9 million, the majority of that's been used in the municipal budget, $1.6 million. And that's the funding that we looked at earlier that allowed us to hire 23 additional police and fire positions over a multi-year period. Much less degree for the schools, $265,000. They've had limited impact from the University Station project. Some students coming from the residential portion of the development, some bus needs to get those students to school. But the majority of this money in this category has been spent to make sure we increased our public safety department to service the project so that our other residents didn't suffer a decrease in service. And also, again, those additional positions have allowed us to improve service throughout the community. So again, really, where is the money being spent? It's with the teaching staff and programs in the top category. It's with our public safety positions in the second category. The third area has been to do some capital within Prop 2.5 without the need for an override. So the debt service for the police bond, the bond to fund the new police station, is about $800,000 a year. The piece we did last year in the road bond, $92,000, those were funded with revenue from University Station. So again, we either couldn't have done the police building, or we would have had to go out for an override to the community.
And let me make two comments. One, the expense forecasts are on target, but the revenue forecasts are higher. I think we were using a number of $5 million net, and we're higher than that. Also, you're going to get $1 million in property tax from the 100 condos. If you look at the average tax bill, we never built that in. That's going to be new revenue. And also, the majority of the meals and hotel tax is coming from University Station. None of that was built in, so that's all net new revenue to the town. And the other thing I would point out is if you look at the increase in police and fire, it went way beyond meeting the needs of University Station. It dramatically increased the services the fire department can deliver and the services the police department can deliver. So it's been a huge net benefit to the town.
Absolutely. And just the final piece is the amount used each year to help mitigate the growth in residential tax bills. So we looked at that earlier on our tax levy chart, that each year there's a piece of revenue not spent. So we're taking in revenue from University Station, we're not increasing the budget to match that, which means their tax dollars are helping to subsidize the programs already in place, providing a bit of relief in the tax bills for all residents. So again, there's more detail in the book that just kind of shows how that's laid in each year. It is something we get asked all the time, though, well, how are you using that money? We've tried to lay it out in this format. If people have any suggestions for a different way to do it, I'm happy to take them.
So I just have a question. A couple of times tonight, I've heard that increase in staffing has allowed for increase in services to the town. Is that described anywhere? What increased services have happened to the town as a result of the increase in staffing in police and fire?
Yep. I think I'm going to ask to hold on that and have, when your subcommittee reports out, and we're talking specifically about that, because I think that's a lot of what they look at has been the service delivery
But Pam, can I make a comment on that, since you have the fire chief here? Prior to our ability to add the number of firefighters, our response time for both ambulance and fire was not what it is today. We were not capable of doing, before University Station, what we're capable of responding to today. So we spent a tremendous amount of time when we focused on fire station, redoing fire station in Islington. What was the response time? What was going on in the fire department? So your response time, I don't know how many, your ability to get 2 ambulances out, to respond to one incident before we have to call a mutual aid. There was a time in Westwood, if you go back a few number of years ago, that in the middle of the night, we were not able to get much equipment or manpower at a house in emergency. We are way beyond that now. So it was a huge impact, especially on fire, in my opinion, of the quality of services town's able to provide. Chief, any comments on that, or?
I mean, I could go on all night about, the impact that University Station has had for us. So there's a lot, and I'll feed it through the subcommittee so that you guys can all see the data. But there's a lot of different changes to George's point about us being able to deploy multiple ambulances, being able to deploy staff. Where before, when our staffing was at 6 people, if the ambulance was at the hospital, you were getting 3 people at your house fire. We need, by standard, to your point, is the NFPA establishes the standard, the National Fire Protection Agency, of what we should have at fires. It's about 17 for a house fire. So between mutual aid and everything, we get that. So the staff that we currently have meets our needs right now to be able to afford you that level of security in your home.
Okay, and then the last on the revenue, just looking at a couple of items. First, free cash. So that's a terrible term, and I know it can be confusing. It's really a thing we do here in Massachusetts. The Department of Revenue, in a sense, certifies your retained earnings at the end of one year, and then you're allowed to use those in subsequent budget years. Requires town meeting vote to use the funds. So we had certified $6.6 million. The bar graph shows in blue the amount certified each year, and in green what we use of that certification. We do have a financial policy that talks about how much of our free cash we should use. Our policy dictates that we should not use all of it. So the current budget proposal utilizes about $3.5 million, and that includes the $125,000 for the stabilization article, and then $3.3 million for the capital. Our policy says we should have about $3.3 million unused. Right now, we're at about 3.1, slightly under policy, but fine. That may change when you see if we have whatever we have for Articles 1 or 2 come forth to supplement the current year. We might use a little bit more, but we're certainly in line with policy overall with free cash. And then finally, on the meals and hotel tax, and there's a couple of pages in the book that show more detail on this account. But this is, the meals and hotel tax revenue is restricted and flows into a separate account as set up by town meeting, and it takes town meeting vote to use the funds. So the balance currently in the account at the end of December, 1.47 million. We expect that balance to be about 1.8 million at the end of June. The current budget proposes to use $1,075,000 of that revenue. Again, that was for that one capital budget article, the townwide recreation pieces. So the money is already on hand. This revenue is right now coming in at about $800,000 a year. We do anticipate that with additional restaurants opening soon down at University Station, that we'll see an increase to that revenue as we go forward. Finally, just next steps. We continue between now and your hearing at the end of March to continue to update any of our revenue projections, particularly following the state budget for any changes to state aid. We review kind of all of our budget estimates, but particularly any assessments we get from others. I mentioned the Blue Hills. We know already that that will change. The MWRA, that Mass Water Resource Assessment in our sewer budget, is another typical one that we might have an update on before you vote the final budget. The health insurance budget is something that you might see a change, currently a 5% estimated increase. The select board, as I mentioned, continuing to go through the capital budget articles and refine those. We'll prepare the articles 1 and 2 for any current year budget supplement. We're going to bring all of that to you in mid-March so that you have time to look at any changes from what's here now to what you'll be asked to vote at the end of March.
What's the Blue Hills assessment?
What is it?
The Blue Hills
I'm sorry. So we're part of the Blue Hills Regional School.
I know
Yes.
what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, but others probably don't, I know. So
When you say that part of it, then I get it.
yes, the Blue Hills Regional School, we're part of that students can choose to go there versus Westwood High School. So we get an assessment from that each year to pay our share of the budget. We are a very small percent of that budget. We're less than 1% of that school enrollment. Westwood typically has 5 to 8 kids going there. But they provide us a number, so they had given us that original number. They'll give us a refinement to that before your final hearing.
Is that assessment on a per pupil basis?
Well,
attendee,
it's
or is it-
mostly based on per pupil, but there's other things that factor into it too. How much money they get from the state. The state actually has the regional schools. Every town is assessed a little bit differently. In a sense, a wealthier town like Westwood, you pay a little bit more based on the state formula for a student to go than some of the other communities.
Anything else?
How much of the 2019 budget wasn't spent?
How much wasn't spent. So, yep. That was a slide we looked at a previous meeting. I can get that for you. Typically, it's about 2%, so it was about $2 million, and it's mostly coming in the fixed cost area. But I'll send those back out.
Thank you.
I'm kind of
The school
numbered out,
department
Jim. I don't want to give you the
School
wrong
Let me
number.
commit that one to memory.
The school department spends it all.
I know the school.
Yeah.
department.
Yeah, we have a chart where we show how much, it's kind of called turn back. So the budgets end on June 30th. We can't carry forward any items. And that's really what rolls into your free cash calculation. But I'll send that chart out to you.
Cindy?
I'm still curious to see how we stack up in terms of towns of similar size with a budget over $100 million.
Yes. And we started to pull that, Cindy. I didn't have it for you tonight,
Okay.
but we are getting that. And the Department of Revenue, I think I mentioned before, we have a lot of reporting compliance with them. So they do have a lot of information we can get from there, and we'll have that for you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Nope, okay, nothing from Howard. So, I know in the middle of March, our committees are gonna be making their presentation, and you're starting to meet with your different subcommittees. And don't forget that a lot of these capital articles need to be addressed too. Like a lot of you, the recreational need to be addressed with recreation and the DPW. It's not just your operating budgets, so just wanted to remind everybody of that. And I think that is it on that front. Thank you very much,
Good.
Pam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So there was an addition put on our agenda, a late addition and we have Nancy Hyde from the Select Board, who is going to speak. And is Chris going to join?
Nora's going to join me and Pat.
And Pat. But welcome, Chris, even though you missed it earlier.
2 meetings for Chris tonight. We do have handouts, which I.
You already?
They're
we
already
have.
got it? Okay, great. Okay. Well, I want to start out by saying thank you for adding us to the agenda. We were here at your meeting 2 weeks ago, and a couple of items came up in the discussion that the Select Board has followed up on. So tonight, we would like to talk to you about our proposed handling of the medical use zoning amendment going forward. As you may recall, at the meeting you had 2 weeks ago, the planning board had voted to no longer bring that article forward. And in speaking with Nora, and even that night it was shared with you, and I think it was shared at the planning board meeting, that there was a possibility that we would take over the article. So what we're going to do tonight is provide you with a historical perspective on what's been going on with trying to amend our medical uses for the past couple of years prior to now, because there are new members on the commission, and I think it's really important that we give that historical perspective first, and then we'll tell you what the Select Board is doing to take a scaled-down version of the medical use article that's been proposed in the past and bring it forward this year, and really bring it to something we think is extremely important to have town support of. And Nora will present on that, and then I will speak to a new article the Select Board is bringing forward. It is in response to the Planning Board's zoning article on Morrison Field, and so I'll talk to that after we do the medical use article. So I'll turn it over to Nora and give you the clicker.
Great, thank you very much. So first I want to just walk you as briefly as possible through the history of medical use zoning in Westwood. Prior to 2013, there was one single medical use term in the zoning bylaw, and that was office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises. That doesn't exactly flow off your tongue, but that's the term that we had. In 2013, there were 3 medical use terms. That office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises, is in there. And then 2 terms were added, office of a healthcare professional and medical center or clinic. Those were both added as part of the University Station project. So the proposed medical use zoning amendment that the selectmen have taken up is intended to clarify where these defined medical uses are permitted and where they're prohibited. This goes back to the fall of 2017 when we first attempted to update the bylaw to correct the multiple use of different terms. The 2017 medical use zoning article did 4 things. It eliminated the awkward and overly broad use title, office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises. It revised the definitions that were added as part of the University Station section of the bylaw for office of a healthcare professional and medical center or clinic. Then it added 2 new definitions for higher intensity medical uses. A definition for hospital and a definition for substance rehabilitation and treatment facility. And then finally, it amended the use chart to include all these medical use terms and required that the higher intensity uses be permitted only by a ZBA special permit. So this chart here shows you what the fall 2017 starting point was. What our medical use section of the zoning use tables look like. And this is currently the same one we have today. There's just that one term, office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises, and it's permitted in all of our business districts and also by a zoning board of appeals special permit in the general residence district. This chart shows what the 2017 article would have done. It would have taken that first term, office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises, and would have just changed the title to office of a healthcare professional in order to line up with our defined term that was in the bylaw. Then it would have added another line for medical center or clinic, and it would have made that use allowable only by special permit, and only allowable in 3 zones: the industrial zone, the industrial office zone, and the administrative research office zone. The 2017 article did 2 more things. It added hospital to this use chart and allowed that only by ZBA special permit in the ARO zone. And it added substance rehabilitation or treatment facility, also only allowed by a zoning board of appeals special permit in the ARO zone. So that was what we were proposing back in 2017. I have a zoning chart, a zoning map here to refresh you of where these uses, where the zones are. There's also a paper one over here, and then I have in your packets a larger version if you want to take a look at it. And I've also given you spelled out definitions for all of the abbreviated overlay districts. UAMUD, for instance, is University Avenue Medical Use District. ARO is Administrative Research Office District. And if you look at the 2 large purple blobs there, one at the very north end of our town and one sort of in the middle, those are the 2 Administrative Research Office districts that in 2017 were proposed as sites for possible hospital and substance rehabilitation treatment centers if they were approved by special permit. So here are the definitions that the 2017 bylaw would have added. One for hospital, defined as a building designed and used for the diagnosis and treatment of human patients that includes overnight care facilities, and substance rehabilitation or treatment facility was designed as a building designed and used for the diagnosis and treatment of human patients for substance rehabilitation and or treatment facilities. Those are 2 definitions that do not currently exist in the bylaw. The fall 2017 medical use article would have also made minor amendments to the 2 definitions that do currently exist in the bylaw: office of a healthcare professional and medical center or clinic. The changes that were proposed at that time did not change the meaning of the sections, but it just included the terms hospital and substance rehabilitation treatment facility that were added to make the 4 definitions exclusive of each other. So the fall 2017 medical use warrant article was first recommended with unanimous support by the planning board. It was supported by the Finance and Warrant Commission. It went to town meeting and it received a more than 2/3 vote. Then the article was reviewed by the Attorney General's office, as all bylaw articles must be. The town submitted the articles to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office found that there was a small procedural defect in the continuation of one of the planning board public hearings. It was actually a hearing that was held here. The planning board had its own hearing, and then because they wanted to be able to accept your comments as part of that hearing, they continued their hearing to here. By the time the hearing ended, there were only 2 planning board members left in the room, and so they were not able to properly continue the hearing with a vote noting a date certain. So that became a problem. The Attorney General's office told the town they could cure that defect by publicizing a notice of what they had done accidentally, and they would be all set as long as no one complained. Well, one resident did complain, and as a result, the Attorney General's office had no choice but to disapprove the article. So the 2017 article did not go forward. Supported by town meeting, but disapproved by the Attorney General's office on a procedural defect. So in 2019, the planning board took a look at this again. So it takes a while to get the approval or disapproval from the Attorney General's office. This was a fall zoning article in 2017. So by the time we heard around April of 2018 that this was not going to go forward, it was too late to get into the 2018 spring annual town meeting process, and we didn't have a fall town meeting that year. So the next opportunity to address this was at the 2019 town meeting. And the planning board took up the article. They requested that the select board have a placeholder on the warrant article list for the 2019 town meeting, and they repeated all 3. There were 3 zoning articles. The medical use was just one of the 3 articles that were disallowed by the Attorney General's office due to that procedural error. So the planning board took up all 3 articles, and they requested that they go forward exactly as they were. Then the planning board in February of 2019 held its public hearing on those 3 articles, and there were concerns from residents about the medical use article. Those concerns were raised primarily by residents abutting the East Street Administrative Research Office District, so the purple blob kind of in the middle of the zoning map there. And a lot of those residents came out to the to the planning board zoning amendment hearing because they had heard a rumor that there was going to be a methadone clinic that was going to be put into that district. The planning board successfully quelled the rumor, explained that that was never the case, but residents were still concerned with the potential for a substance rehabilitation and treatment facility to go in that ARO district. So the planning board said, we'll take a step back, we'll withdraw the article. They requested that the select board allow them to withdraw the article from the warrant, and they vowed to spend the next year working on a new medical uses bylaw that would achieve the goals we had of clarifying the bylaw and also putting these undefined uses somewhere in the town. So a year has gone by since then, and the planning board did talk about this. They did reserve the warrant article for medical uses warrant article, but they didn't actually spend a significant amount of time talking about what the new article would do, how it would be different than the 2020 article. The first time the planning board actually got in depth in discussing the potential was at their January 21st meeting, when one of the planning board members brought forth a proposal for this 2020 medical use initial warrant article. And that proposal had a couple of features to it. It would not only add the new definitions of hospital and substance rehabilitation treatment facility, but it would find a new way of placing them on the map. Rather than use the two ARO districts as the only place where you could get a special permit for these, this planning board member's article would have developed something called a medical facilities overlay district, a new overlay district for the town, and the proposal was to overlay two areas of the town. One would be most of the ARO district in the north of the town off of Louderbrook and Longwood Drive, and another would be a portion of University Station. So the planning board took a look at that article, and they decided that it was a new procedure, and coming in on January 21st, they didn't feel they had enough time to fully vet it and go forward with the process. So they decided to ask the select board to withdraw the article. The select board considered the request of the planning board to withdraw the article. I spoke to the select board at that meeting and explained why I think the article is important and that there are essential elements of it that really need to go forward this year. The select board discussed it and they agreed, and the select board voted to take over sponsorship of this article. They also decided to focus only on the most essential elements of a change to the medical use definitions and medical use placement in the use chart. So the select board decided to do three things. One was to keep the existing definitions with no changes. Those two definitions are for office of a healthcare professional and medical center or clinic. They decided not to add the other definitions for hospital or substance rehabilitation treatment facility at this time. They took the already defined uses of office of a healthcare professional and medical center or clinic, and they added them to the use chart, and then they removed outdated references to office of a doctor or dentist not a resident on the premises. The select board agreed that other changes, more extensive changes that were contemplated in 2017 and initially contemplated this year by the planning board's members' proposed article, needed further time to be vetted, and they recommend that the planning board pursue these other changes over the coming year and come back at another town meeting. So the planning board's medical use article that is now going to be before this board, you'll hear more about it at your public hearing, it would take the use chart and replace office of a doctor or dentist not a resident on the premises with office of a healthcare professional. It wouldn't change any of the districts where that use is allowed. They would remain the same. We would just change the title so the title goes along with the definition that's in the bylaw. And then they would add a line for medical center or clinic. They would make medical center or clinic prohibited in all zones except for University Station, where it is currently specifically allowed. The definition for medical center or clinic was put in the bylaw as part of the UAMUD, University Avenue Multiple Use District, and it was put in there specifically to go at University Station. So a medical center or clinic is something like Brigham and Women's building that's down there now. That's allowed at University Station with approval of the planning board as a medical center or clinic. This change to the bylaw simply clarifies that. It doesn't change anything, it just puts those categories into the use chart to make it clear to everyone that's where medical centers or clinics are allowed and nowhere else. So there's a change not only to the use chart itself, section 4.1.5, but there's a note that goes into the next section of the bylaw, which is notes on principal table of uses. They add note 8 that says that it modifies the prohibited in the industrial district by saying, except in accordance with all applicable provisions of section 9.7, University Avenue Mixed-Use District. Here are the definitions. They're the current definitions that are in the bylaw today, and they're the definitions that would remain if this article is approved by town meeting. Office of a healthcare professional is defined as an office for a medical doctor, dentist, psychologist, chiropractor, acupuncturist, or similar physical or mental health care professional, including clinical and laboratory analysis activities directly associated with such medical office use, but excluding offices within medical centers or clinics. And then a medical center or clinic is defined as a building designed and used for the diagnosis and treatment of human patients that does not include substance rehabilitation or overnight care facilities. So the Select Board's article makes no changes to the current definitions and adds no additional terms or definitions. So now this slide compares the now 4 different versions of the medical use article. At the top, you'll see the 2017 Planning Board article that was passed by town meeting and then ruled out by the Attorney General's office. That would have done 3 things. It would have made changes to the definitions of Office of Healthcare Professional and Medical Center Clinic. It would have added new definitions for hospital and substance rehabilitation or treatment facility, and it would have added those definitions, those defined terms to the use chart. The 2019 article that the Planning Board started out with and then withdrew would have done the same thing. The 2020 article that the Planning Board started to continue before again requesting withdrawal would have done those 3 things, and one more. It would have created a new medical facilities overlay district. The bottom row, the Select Board article, will only do one of those 4 items. It will only expand the zoning use chart to include the medical uses. It will not change the current definitions, it will not add definitions, and it will not create a new overlay district. So the Select Board will proceed with the streamlined version of this medical use warrant article. The Planning Board has been invited to co-sponsor the article with the Selectmen if they so choose. Whether they choose to or not, the Planning Board will review the Select Board article at its February 25th zoning amendment article. At that time, it reviews all zoning amendments, whether they're proposed by the Select Board, the Planning Board, or in other years by petitioner articles. There are none of those this year. And then the final language will be reviewed with the Finance and Warrant Commission at your first hearing on March 20th. March 2nd.
Could you explain, thank you very much, could you explain why you considered this important enough that that we accomplished this? Like, what risk was the town taking without it?
So since 2017, the risk probably has existed since 2013. We began to see interest in medical centers or clinics that were looking at Westwood in 2017, and that's when we brought up the proposed bylaw change for the first time. We think it's important that these are fairly high-intensity uses, and we feel it's important that they be directed to areas that can handle them. There's a definite difference between an office of a healthcare professional, or as we define it right now, office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises, and a medical center. There's a difference between Westwood Pediatrics office on High Street and Brigham and Women's Medical Center on University Avenue. The difference is in scale, in traffic, just it's a more intense use, and we want to make sure that those larger uses are not able to go into the local business districts, the highway business district, the industrial district, wherever they choose to. We want to make sure there's a clear process, and the process that was contemplated at the time in the University Station section was added was that they go into University Station where they're reviewed by the Planning Board. So we're proposing this article now because we believe that the current bylaw leaves that question open. By defining medical centers or clinics, but not putting it in the use chart, and only mentioning it at University Station, we are interpreting the bylaw to say that that's the only place it's allowed. But the question is out there, and our building commissioner has received questions from businesses that want to know where they can put them. So we want to make sure this is crystal clear, we're all on the same page. Medical centers or clinics can only go at University Station.
And we also want to prevent exposure to impact on our commercial tax base. So for instance, if it isn't kept in that vicinity and we're challenged somewhere else under the current zoning, that kind of use is generally for a nonprofit, which impacts our ability to tax the medical use facility.
So the University Station properties are covered by a development agreement that allows this, that requires the property owner to negotiate a pilot agreement if they put a nonprofit facility at University Station. That's not the case in other commercial districts throughout the town.
Why, I guess this goes to Nancy, the select board's article, why would it be scaled back from what the proposed planning board 2020 article would be?
Well, Nora mentioned that last year with the discussions that occurred with some neighborhood opposition to one of the locations, there was a commitment to take on a more thorough review of locational aspects of where the medical use and substance abuse facilities could go. That didn't occur. And we don't think at this point there's sufficient time to fairly evaluate it and get public input. So what we're choosing to do is something that is very digestible, very important, but the other work still needs to be done to address the other elements that have been proposed in the past. And we're not equipped to do that. We really think that the planning board should take that up over the course of following months.
So if this article was approved, it's a first step. It solves the significant problem that we see by the lack of clarity in our bylaw. It's a simple, straightforward, necessary but essential step that we need to take. The planning board can then build on that and go back to the article that was presented to them in January and consider that between now and the next town meeting to see if they'd like to take the additional steps. But this first step of at least getting the terms that are defined in our bylaw into the use chart to make it very clear where they're permitted and where they're prohibited really is an essential step.
Okay, Nora, you had mentioned previously in the presentation that the planning board was invited to take part in this.
Yes, so
They accepted the invitation?
They received that invitation today, and I was here at this meeting, so I don't know for sure
I
whether
don't
they've
believe they
accepted
did,
or not.
right? No action was taken yet.
Still time.
There's still time, and at their February 25th meeting, they will have a public hearing on the article, and they'll review it in depth, and perhaps at that time they'll decide to join on.
Is there a question over here? Yeah.
So the risk is if we don't implement this new medical facilities overlay district, if a company is interested in opening a rehab or other medical use facility, there's nowhere that's zoned for it or against it, right?
So
Or
right-
said are against it but not for it, so therefore they could come into the town
So
without.
I don't think the proposal that is before you has any effect on either hospital or substance rehabilitation
Right.
treatment facility. They're not defined now, they're not defined in this bylaw.
So until they're defined, we're at risk, the town is at risk.
I believe that an undefined use can always cause a challenge. One of the bylaw amendments that the planning board spoke to you about when they were here last time was they want to strengthen their prohibitive language to prevent that. But an undefined use, I believe, always provokes a challenge. A use that's defined and not categorized creates an even greater challenge.
We just approved an infusion center over at Glacier Park.
So
How does that fit into all of this?
It's actually a distribution center. The principal use of that building is a medical use distribution center. It's actually considered more of an industrial use, I guess. They're processing pharmaceutical prescriptions, and most of them will be delivered from that site. Some of them will be picked up by residents. At some point in the future, they may allow infusions as well as just you're picking up your prescription. But the building commissioner reviewed that and determined that that was a permitted use in the industrial district.
So
It was not considered a medical center or a clinic or an office of a healthcare professional.
Because they're
It was
not
a
treating patients
pharmaceuticals.
there?
They're not.
I'm on page I don't know.
So we'll put them there.
I'm numbered.
Oh, they're unnumbered. I'm on an unnumbered page. It's here, this is where I found
I can put it up on the
definition.
screen.
Whatever that-
Would you
wherever
pop it
that
back
is.
up for
Yes,
us?
please, here it is.
So that's incredibly broad. So I don't know what the difference, why you believe that that describes a more intensive activity than your definition of the office of a healthcare professional. Because all of these folks focus on the diagnosis and treatment of human
They do,
professionals.
they do.
Yeah, of humans, of human patients. So why would you think that if someone were going to question the bylaws, they would not challenge your definitions? Don't you need
So
to?
they very well may, and that's why it's before the planning board to look at it in greater detail and take further steps. Those definitions that are in there were put in there as part of the University Station project. They were put in there to define the uses that were allowed at University Station with planning board approval, and they were looked at as two different things. One was a single office, and one was a conglomeration of offices, medical offices together that create the medical center or clinic.
Doesn't say that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude.
Understand. So I understand that it was written in a way that I think needs more work, but at this point, I think the focus is to do the minimum to get our bylaw as clear as we possibly can with what we're working on. I think if we went and changed those definitions now, without also looking at how to address hospitals and how to address substance rehabilitation treatment facilities, we may be opening up a larger can of worms. So I think you have to do one thing first, which is address the use chart, and then I think the planning board has to take a look at the entire medical use issue, the locations where they're permitted, the exact definitions for these two terms, and definitions for hospital and substance rehabilitation treatment facility. And I think the definitions can be expanded upon at that time to make clear definitions, clear distinctions between those four uses. But these are definitions that we already have, and we've had since 2013, and we simply want to show where they're permitted and where they're not. The bylaw is still interpreted by our building commissioner. That's his job to determine which is an office of a healthcare professional and which is a medical center or clinic. He'll continue to do that. He's done that since these definitions were put in 2013, but he has had more questions about what's allowed and what's not.
And can I just ask a follow-up question on the earlier one? If the building that Jim just referenced is actually used for infusion services in the future, it fits these definitions.
It may be, but that would be as an accessory use. The principal use of the structure is as a pharmaceutical distribution center. So when the building commissioner, as our zoning enforcement officer, looks at a property, he determines whether the principal use is permitted or not, and then whether the accessory use is. So this medical, if they do eventually do infusions, and that remains to be seen, they're interested in doing that at some future stage, there'll have to be a determination of whether that's permitted or not. Right now, because our bylaw simply says office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises, and that's a use that's allowed in the highway business district where this distribution center has been set up, it's allowed to have that. It's allowed to be an industrial use pharmaceutical distribution center, and it's allowed to be an office of a doctor or dentist. So if there's a doctor that sets up in that building and performs infusions, that's currently allowed under our bylaw. A medical center would not be allowed. It's a distinction. It
is, and this is clearly not my specialty of law. We do have a lawyer in the room who I believe it is. So, that must be correct.
It could be improved upon, and I hope that the planning board will take it up to improve upon the definitions in a future article. I hope that this year we'll at least just take the uses that are already defined and put them in our chart so that we know where they're permitted and where they're not.
So really, your only goal of this proposal is to get the definition of medical center or clinic in your chart and have it not just hanging out in the University Station section of your bylaws.
Right,
That's
because
your
the term,
only goal.
yes, the term is defined in the definition section, and then the only other place it's mentioned right now is in University Station. But the question is, how is that different than an office of a doctor or dentist, not a resident on the premises, and why can't I put that on High Street. That's the question that we want to solve, and we want to say, you clearly can't. The bylaw was written so that you could only put that at University Station. So that's what we're looking to do here. And then there is more work to be done. There are additional steps to look at medical uses on a holistic level, and we're hoping that the planning board will take that up before the next town meeting.
So it does sound like pretty critical work. If the planning board doesn't take it up, can the select board take it up?
We have.
You have.
We
The-
have.
The longer
The long-
term.
the
I mean,
long-
the
the
long
long
term-
tense.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, no, it
that would
seems
be
like
the
the
planning board.
longer term discussion is very critical work.
Yes.
This is simply fixing a very small piece of that.
It's the first step.
It's the first step, but let's say the planning board does not take up the issue. Can the select board take up the issue of the
We'll
longer term?
have to talk about that. I mean, our hope is the planning board does, so we haven't answered if they don't. It had been their intent this year, so I'm optimistic.
Nora, so the difference in the industrial district from 2017 to the new proposal is, in 17, it required ZBA approval, but that was for the
Correct.
entire industrial district. And now it's restricted to just University Station. Is that because that's already allowed?
Yes,
Is that a
that's
change
that's
from
exactly what it is.
2017?
It's just taking the use that is presently allowed. It was allowed in 2013, it's allowed in 2017, it's allowed today. You can have a medical center or clinic anywhere in University Station with planning board approval, and the approval is just a site plan review at University Station. So that district was created with the understanding that it could have medical centers or clinics in it. This changes the bylaw, not as it was in 2017, where we were trying to look at larger areas where these medical centers or clinics might go, but only by special permit. It now makes it an allowed use only at University Station.
Right, so it tightens up that particular
It
district.
does, and it continues the practice that we actually have, but clarifies the practice to hopefully avoid confusion and back up the zoning enforcement officer's decisions.
Chris?
First, Nora, thank you very much. This is a welcome and very well-done presentation. It has enlightened me, and it answers a lot of questions I had from 2 weeks ago when the planning board was here. But I do want to follow up on Diane's question and what was just asked of you, especially in light of the infusion, I don't want to call it center, but the infusion work going on. Potentially.
Potential, right.
And I'm looking at the proposed zoning chart, and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be better to put BA under industrial instead of N with the note? I'm not the Attorney General, but I would think that that would raise a red flag to the Attorney General that a town defines something and then says you can't put it here anywhere.
Are you saying for the medical center or clinic, or for the office of a?
No, a medical center or clinic.
He's saying this chart.
Yes,
here.
Isn't it better to have at least one place where it can go?
I think that would be a good idea, and I think that's something that the planning board needs to take up. So the most recent, the 2020 planning board proposal, what it would have done is allow it in this new overlay district that would have two locations, and one of them.
I'm just concerned that when, we, in the best scenario, we pass this at town meeting, and then the Attorney General says, no, you're prohibiting everywhere, so I'm not gonna allow it. And we're back to square one.
So I don't think we are prohibiting everywhere. I think we're allowing it on one district, the UAMUD.
That it's
We're allowing
already,
it by overlay district in that one district. I think yes, I do think that eventually, I would hope the planning board would allow uses in more than just that one district, only by special permit. But keep in mind that the reason we're sticking with that district is that it's already there, it's already allowed, and that's the only district that we have, the property owner has the obligation to negotiate a pilot agreement. So that's why it's important to stay there until we have additional means in place to make sure that we have
all right.
an appropriate use.
It's a
I understand.
protection of tax revenue.
I understand, but the optics of putting a line in the chart and then having all ends with just a little footnote, to me, raises a red flag.
So if we were to put a BA and allow it by special permit anywhere in the industrial district, then it's not just allowed at University Station, but it's allowed anywhere in the industrial district. It's allowed elsewhere on University
Right.
Avenue.
Well, we've already kind of allowed it at Glacier.
It's not, we have not allowed a medical center or a clinic at Glacier. What's at Glacier is an industrial facility that may, in the future, have a doctor's office in it, where that doctor can, or, I don't actually know, some health professional, it might not be a
Yeah,
doctor.
it sounds like the building commissioner was put between a rock and a hard place and said, okay, I'll let it go.
Well, I think what he did was he said that there are two allowed uses that are proposed here. One is the distribution center, which is clearly an industrial use, and the other is an office of a healthcare professional that administers infusions. Both of those are allowed in the industrial district in our current bylaw, and both would be allowed under this proposed change. But a medical center or clinic
Well, you'd still
would not
have-
be allowed.
You'd still have the requirement to get a special permit, so you'd still have some control over where it went.
If
In
it
the-
was,
in
if
the
it was a medical
industrial
center or clinic, yes.
in the industrial district, the zoning board of appeals could always put such severe restrictions on a special permit that the proponent will elect not to do it.
They could, as long as those restrictions went after legitimate concerns, and I'm not sure that the town's capacity to tax the facility would be a strong enough concern. So I'm not sure that the zoning board of appeals could easily deny a facility that was otherwise had no negative effect on the neighborhood or town. But that would be a question for the zoning board. Our proposal here, though, is just to keep the status quo and clarify the bylaw so that we can keep the status quo. I think there are bigger issues about where it should be allowed, whether it should be allowed by special permit, either in the industrial district, the ARO district, or some other overlay district, as was proposed by one of the planning board members. I think that's a much larger discussion that needs more time and is rightfully before the planning board. That's what those board members were elected to do, to plan for our town. So I hope that they will take it up before the next town meeting, but I don't think we can afford to wait any longer on this smaller essential change.
Thank you.
So I think we're making a good first step, but obviously you've heard a lot of concerns
There's
about all
more
the
to do.
steps that need to go forward, and maybe we can express that to the planning board. Yes, Caitlin.
This footnote references section 9.7.
Yes.
Is that included in this packet? Can we read through that as well?
I can send that to you. It's not in this packet. Section 9.7 is the University Avenue Mixed-Use District section of the bylaw. So it's a section that talks about everything at University Station. It's online if you want to see the zoning bylaw, but if you'd like me to send it to you, I can do that as well.
And I want to add, I know this has been a lot of information, and especially if it's new to people, that I think your normal process might be for questions to go through Jane to come to us. We really want to address your questions and have this history perspective be clear. And this discussion has been great tonight, but if there's follow-up, we really will respond as completely as we can.
But do go through Jane so she can make sure that we get.
Then everybody
that
gets the
everybody
information. Yeah, you know, we're trying to determine what best to do at the public hearing. When it comes to it, the article itself is a very simple item, and it's simple in a context that's not simple. It's all relative. After this, if you have feedback on what you would like to see at the public hearing, because there's a world out there that is speculating as to what we're doing here tonight, and speculating and talking about, is it going in my neighborhood, or they're doing it again, or they didn't do, and we really gave this history so we can channel exactly what we're doing, what we're not doing, what still needs to be done, and to take some of the controversy out of this, because it was controversial last year. And so any advice you have for us on what we should be presenting when we come to the public hearing, we just really appreciate tonight that we could get the conversation going, hopefully in the right direction, and hopefully get to the place where you can support this, so town meeting can be effective.
Okay, any more questions? If you think of something more, email Jane and we'll get that out. And if we can get that bylaw, I know that
Yes,
you can
I'll
find it,
get
but if
to
we
Nora
can.
tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, the zoning bylaw in general is very dense, and that's referring to one section, but it's got a lot of great information in it. And it was all reorganized a few years back, so it
It is easy
is
to
a
find.
bit more user-friendly.
It is easy to find things.
On what is a very
That is
technical
an
document.
apt description of the zoning bylaw. Dense.
All right, so I have one more, and sorry to keep you, I know we're, the night is long.
Pushing.
You've had a lot before you.
You're pushing it, that's okay.
Sorry to push, but we do appreciate it. Okay, so when you were at your meeting a couple of weeks ago, there was a discussion about a zoning article that was designed to do something at Morrison Park. And just by way of recent history, when the planning board first mentioned bringing forth an article to try to take the Morrison Park property out of what is an FMUOD, a mixed-use overlay district in Islington, they first referred to it as a housekeeping item. And if you haven't heard that before, housekeeping is usually, there was a word missing, or something was there and a comma was where it shouldn't be, and, you know, it's really minor. That's how it was first discussed, and that was very early. And then it became more of, well, why was this ever in the FMUOD? Let's just take it out. And then it became, we're trying to protect Morrison Field. So our presentation tonight is in response to what seems to be more of an interest in protecting Morrison Field and how best to do that. So that's what we, as the select board, decided would be best to bring forward to you. And there is still a zoning article proposal out there from the planning board, and I don't believe they took any action to remove it. So this could be a dual path type thing, just to make life interesting. Anyway, with the goal to be to protect the Morrison Park land. And number one would be what is being proposed by the planning board of taking the Morrison Park land out of the overlay district. The second option that we're bringing to you is actually to designate the land as recreational land under something called Article 97. 2 weeks ago, you might recall Michael Walsh mentioning that this would be a possibility and actually a better way to actually do more to protect the land. Now, nobody has spoken about anything happening to Morrison Park other than its recreational use as a ball field. But if we want to secure that use for the long term, this is what we're putting before you as a proposal. Nice little picture here of the park. And what we're identifying on this slide is what aspects of, I'll call it a complex. There are a lot of things going on there. You have the park, you have the snack shack, you have a parking lot, and you have what is now, again, a DPW garage. It had actually been a garage that housed the fire station temporarily, and then it was a facility used by the MBTA when the East Street Bridge project was done. So what we're focusing on are including only the Little League field, the softball field, and the basketball courts under an Article 97 protection. And this will allow the land to stay as recreational use, to make it nearly impossible. There are steps we'll go through that could help, you know, if it were ever to be taken out of this Article 97 protection, but it really does protect it for the long term. And what we are not including are those elements I was mentioning before. We are not including the snack shack property, the DPW garage, the parking area that's along East Street, and a fourth item that you might not even think about. There's actually a cell tower that's, the flagpole is a cell tower, and the town collects revenue from that. And so we want to keep that out of it in case, you know, we need to renew leases or whatever. There's some elements of that complex of land that we do not want to have under this protection. If you go online and look up about Article 97, what comes out is how do you take it out of Article 97? It's not so much what do you do to put it in, but how do you take it out? And the hurdles are bifold. Recreation Commission would become under the custody, is that the fair thing to say?
Yeah, the article will have to put it in the custody, care, and control of the Recreation Commission. It already is that way from an operational perspective, but I've talked with the representatives from the DCR, and they would want to see us pass the article and record it with a deed so that the restriction runs with the deed ad infinitum.
So we do have a Recreation Commission appointed by the Select Board, and the first stop would be a unanimous vote of that commission. then it would go back to our town meeting, go through this process, it would require a 2/3 vote there, and then it would have to go to the state, and it would have to meet 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate at the state level. If, and I don't believe this applies in this case, a fourth step is to comply with all requirements of any state, federal funding that may have been used to purchase the parcel. And then fifth would be compliance with the EOEA, land disposition policy, et cetera. You can read that for yourself. So those are the steps that any Article 97 land needs to go through. And if we do this, it would apply here. So this is the summary of what we're talking about. And our town council, Mr. Ahern, has been working on this for us, is what land would be included, and that's the official assessor's map identification, and what would be excluded out of that 300 Washington Street property, and then just preliminary language on the warrant article that we think would be used. Before I just close on this, I want to get back to the planning board's other article. We feel that that article does not accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, that by taking it out of the FMUOD, it really doesn't do anything to protect the land. I think maybe we just have to agree to disagree on that. So that might be why it continues to come forward, but I'll let the planning board speak for itself. We do feel that the Article 97 action would be a productive way to protect the land, if indeed that's the goal that we have here, other than the fact that the town has no plans to do anything other than what it is right now, but we're more talking about 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So that's why we hope that you'll support this.
Questions?
Does it prevent the use of the field as an emergency helicopter evac site?
Good question. That's one I haven't asked DCR, but
But Chris is right, that's how it is sometimes used.
we'll have,
Especially if you're having a game there and somebody gets
somebody gets hurt there, yeah. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that I guess as I sit here, I could argue that it's in furtherance of recreation that you're applying medical treatment to someone who is playing there.
and it's an emergency.
And
so-
it's an emergency.
Doesn't that count?
So, in those situations, I think I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission.
I agree.
So are there other things that are restricted? Are we restricted in being able to do further improvements to it?
No.
or-
No. So
No,
we've been
not
checking into that.
not if it's in furtherance of recreation.
So you could put it in a turf field at some point?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and I even raised the question, and it horrified me to raise it, was what if baseball's no longer important? And they said, you can turn
They
it
said,
into.
shame on you, okay.
Yeah, you can turn it into a soccer field, and the guy from the DCR that I'm talking to said he was a huge baseball fan. But, so, if sometimes baseball goes away and we have, I don't know, pickleball becomes the rage, we could probably turn it into
Lacrosse.
pickleball or lacrosse.
We want to make sure we can maintain
Need
it
something-
too.
Right.
Need something,
Replace the backstop, the fences if we need it.
Oh, no.
Okay. Jim, you had a
We
question?
all-
Oh,
Head, Mike.
I'm sorry. No, you didn't,
Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. When it was first presented, and I still have the same feeling now, because it's, restricting a future action, who can predict the future? And to put the town in a position where it becomes virtually difficult to do what the town in 20 years may think is the right thing for the town. Why would we set that precedent?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. We did this once before with what was then Lowell Woods and the Stryer property. The federal government came to us with a grant, I want to say $300,000, if we turned that into conservation land. We thought, I was on the Board of Selectmen at the time, we thought it was worthy of the town making that decision. We think this is worthy of the town making the decision. If the town wants to protect it ad infinitum, where it's very difficult to pull it out, then the town can do it. If not, it can choose not to and maintain its flexibility.
I mean,
Well, from what I understand, based upon the 97, I think the statement you made, Nancy, is there's language written to show people how to get out of it.
There are.
So going into it, may seem like, intellectually sounds like maybe, why would we do that? Everyone's jumping out of the pool and we're jumping in.
So years
People
ago,
don't know.
years ago, I looked at this, and if you look at the bills filed in the legislature, there's 1 or 2 towns a year that look to get Article 97 land out. And I don't know, I've never stopped to see how successful they are.
And it's, jumping through the hoops, but which, again, raises my question is, why would we put ourselves in that position? Because as I understood it, this zoning was established just a few years ago, and it does provide for the sole use of recreation, and it would take the town to make a decision not to continue that use. It would have to be approved through town meeting, and if there was some concern that the suggestion to take it out of recreation to something else would have to be shown, approved, and establish some value. So
It's not a low hurdle by any stretch.
yeah, I just concerned about being restricted for future use.
That's a worthwhile comment and concern.
Okay, Jim?
I presume since you're carving out all these areas, we're gonna have to do a survey?
Yes.
And is it just a simple deed restriction that you're recording? So you record the survey or what's the process for getting it into 97?
Town meeting vote,
That's it?
yeah.
Okay.
Town meeting vote and record, if town meeting votes it and the Attorney General approves it, we'd record the deed, the town meeting warrant article, that article, as described, is Article 97, protected.
And what's your estimate for the fall town meeting or spring 2021?
No.
You think you'll have it done for this one?
If the town votes it and the Attorney General approves it, probably by early next fall, the deed restriction would be on.
Would you have the survey before town meeting?
We've ordered the survey as we sit here and speak.
Yeah, Tom?
How long has Morrison Park been there? I know I played baseball there.
Well, then you
In
tell
the old
us.
times.
At least 60 years.
So I've done a little bit of the deed research, and it looks like that we bought it in 1953, from what I can tell. We just bought it for land. It doesn't seem, from what I saw, and I didn't do an extensive deed research on it, doesn't look like there was any plan. I have no idea when they put the Little League field in. Perhaps you can help us out with that. It's been there, I've been married 35 years, and it's been there for more than 35 years that I can remember. It's been there a long time. Urban legend has it, it was once a turnaround for the trolley coming from Boston, and if you dig down 3 or 4 to 6 inches, you can find clay and what appears to be ash there. That's why it doesn't drain that well.
Well, the reason I asked that sort of semi-rhetorical question, obviously, is that it's been there a long time, and it's been sort of revered as obviously, recreational area and a ball field, and I know that Nora's husband John and I know Chris, did an awful lot of work a number of years ago and got that field to be what it is today, and they did some phenomenal work, and a lot of people did some great work. But along with what Mike is saying, the old unintended consequences. What if the first parish parcel, or what if some stretch of land down in University Station area, what if there was something that would allow for a number of basketball courts, and that we wanted to use that basketball court for something really, really, some tremendous use, some sort of a building or whatever.
Now you've got to go through all these steps to get access.
And now you've got to go through these hoops. And as Mike said, and as there's already some hoops to go through. There's already some controls in place, right? Why not completely handcuff us, but but more so handcuff us when we may not need to.
Right. I think that's an appropriate way to look at it, and us doing this is not to say, we've been talking about this for a long time, it's time to protect this land. It really is in response to what was initiated by the planning board, and yet showing if that's really the intent, then this is the way to do it. You can all evaluate whether or not you think that, and you should evaluate, do you think that's the right thing to do? So just know that.
When we put Stryer Woods and Lowell Woods into conservation, people were very concerned that we were tying our hands as a community. What if we need this land? What if we need it to do, at the time, an affordable housing situation to get us over the 10%? So those are legitimate questions to ask, and the town's got to decide. Do they want to tie their hands to maintain what is really, I think, a gem in the middle of Islington? And about 10 years ago or so, we changed the lights there. We had old lights there. I think they were donated by the Red Sox, truth be told. And they had spillage. And when we changed the lights, a couple people in Islington called me and said, "What's the problem with Morrison? They're not playing baseball there?" The new lights don't have the spillage, so they didn't know they were playing games down there. I said, "You're going to have to go look and see when the games are." Because a lot of people in that neighborhood love to walk over and just watch a couple innings of a Little League baseball game. It's a great take, and so that's an antidote. I apologize.
Not to fuel your questions, but back, and Nora can fill in some blanks if I create them. The reason the property was first in the overlay district had to do with, in general, the overlay district to apply in Islington and encourage economic development. When we were looking at where to locate a replacement fire station for the Islington Fire Station, we were looking at a lot of different things, and at one point, one of the options was diagonally across the street from where the station now is and was before, where the CVS new building is, and doing a combined police and fire there. So the property across the street, the fire station, and it was all one parcel, Morrison and the fire station, may have been part of an economic development piece, not a municipal station. Well, I don't think Morrison Park would have gone away, but a portion of the property may have. So that's why it had the overlay district apply to it. So I make that more as, okay, that's a little history, but it's also a perspective of, we didn't really know what might happen, and we don't necessarily know what that opportunity may be 30 years from now. You don't know what you don't know. Do we all care about keeping Morrison Park? I haven't heard anybody who says, no, get rid of that. I mean, that's not where people are coming from. It is a gem, it's iconic, it's important to the community on so many levels. So it's just, there's a lot of things you have to keep in mind when you make a decision like this.
So, Cindy, go ahead.
So, and as it stands now, as part of the FMUOD, should the town decide to sell Morrison Field, which no one is saying they are going to, but as part of the FMUOD, that it becomes only developable by special permit? Is that correct?
Only by special permit if you want to put in a mixed-use development. If you wanted to do just straight business, then that's just by a site plan review. Either way, it's before the planning board.
That's the underlying zoning.
Right, the underlying zone is local business B, so you could either develop it, if the town decided to sell it, which is hard to imagine, it would have to first go through a 2/3 vote of town meeting to agree to sell the property. And then the property could be developed either for a straight business use with a site plan review by the planning board, or for a mixed-use development with a special permit from the planning board.
And without the FMUOD designation?
It could still be developed through a business use. You'd still have that first step of 2/3 votes of town meeting to sell it, and then you'd have the site plan review by the planning board for a business use.
But you don't
It doesn't take away the development
And it
ability.
would still be the
This-
2/3, yeah.
This Article 97.
You don't
takes away.
necessarily have to sell it to develop it either. You could, this Board of Selectmen could lease it on a fairly short-term basis if they had a tenant that wanted to do that.
So removing it from FMUOD really has no
benefit.
It's a symbolic.
It just
It's symbolic more than anything.
limits the ability to have housing in there.
That's
Correct.
So
And
it's
it
not
takes away
about
the special
protecting
permit.
Morrison, it's about reducing the potential for any housing, and we've got other protections for that.
We do.
in that
Also,
area.
keep in mind that because you would need a two-thirds vote to take it out of town ownership, a two-thirds vote to rezone it at that time would be conceivable. If the voters were intending to take it out of town ownership, they would probably be intending to rezone it for whatever use you might want. So if there was some proposal years down the line where someone wanted to have housing at that location, they could rezone it at that time with the same majority. I don't think that's on the table. I don't think anyone is looking to do anything other than continue it as a ballpark. So this proposal would allow the preservation, if indeed that's the goal. If that's what residents are looking to do, to protect the area, Article 97 protects it. Changing the zoning doesn't.
Okay, I cite Howard, who wants to speak. Go ahead, Howard. He's on the phone.
Just a quick question. Making it recreation area, I assume that also means the town can't use it. Forget about selling it. The town can't use it for anything itself. If the town wanted to put up a small building in the corner of the field, I assume we could not do that. Is that true?
Unless it's in furtherance of recreation.
Okay. So it restricts the use by the town as well. It's not just about selling it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think we're done here. At least we are.
Yeah, you're done. I think we need to talk a little bit here, but.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for complicating matters.
Just trying to do our job.
So, we're done with questions.
Howard, you're back on speaker, okay? Bob's just gonna finish up.
We now have 2 more articles that have to be written about. Does the planning group want to do it?
Yep, I'll talk to Lauren and Bill.
Okay, I don't know, I don't think you can vote on the article on Morrison, you can't vote for both of them positively, so we'll see how it comes out.
I'm guessing, well, both of them could go forward, right? I mean, the planning board would have to withdraw it for it not to go forward.
Well, they could go forward, but I think it would be difficult for us to recommend both of them going. We kind of have to pick and choose when we go to vote about which one we.
So we'd discuss them
support.
simultaneously. I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, if they both go forward, don't we vote on both?
Yeah, we definitely would vote on both.
But I think we would discuss them simultaneously and
And I think we have to talk to.
They're not mutually exclusive. We could recommend approval of both of them.
That's right.
Yeah,
well, I guess the first one, you would vote for the more stringent one first. If that passed, then the less stringent one falls away.
yeah.
Right?
So we'll talk to, we shouldn't be talking about it now. When we have a planning board, we will discuss with them if they want to withdraw theirs or their views on it. So we will probably take it a little out of order when they come forward to us. Let's see.
And they're gonna meet on the 24th,
25th?
yeah, the planning board, again, so they might have some changes.
Which is,
before.
yeah,
Is that right, the 24th or 25th?
yeah, but it's, in any event, our next meeting
Before
is
us.
is March 2nd.
Yes.
So March 2nd is a public hearing, which public hearings start at 7.
25th. Thank you, 25th.
So we'll be March 2nd here at 7. And what else do I have? Do we have any?
Can you I gave you this, I apologize for all this paper tonight, but I just wanted you to see the articles and just take a minute to look at them to make sure I got it right on the assignments, and then I'll send it to you electronically. That is fine. And then 2 subcommittees are working. You need to start thinking about, I'll send you the deadlines because March 10th is when you'll report out, so your group should be deciding who's going to do, there'll be a written document for the front of the book, and then also there'll be the presentations that need to get done on the 10th. So there's a lot of work for subcommittees still, particularly municipal, so I'll send you all those deadlines like this week, so you'll have a process.
Yeah, and you'll talk about like the computer. and
Yes.
What you've got for the computer and
Yes.
that. And hopefully it will only be our presentations. We won't have anybody else for those meetings. Anything Does anybody in the public want to speak? No questions, okay. Connor, you want to speak? Okay,
Just to be clear, we're not meeting tomorrow.
no, we're not meeting tomorrow.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes.
You're always good about that.
Snow days, yes, we haven't had any. Hopefully, we won't. I think that's it, so.
Motion to adjourn?
We just need to do a roll call, I'm sorry, because we have a remote participant, so.
Are we doing a roll call to adjourn?
Yes, we
Okay,
just have to do.
can I have a motion to adjourn?
I think.
Motion to adjourn.
Mike
Okay,
made it.
second?
Second.
Thank you, I'm gonna give.
Okay, now you do your roll call.
Yes, thank you, I'm sorry. Barb,
Here,
you're gonna say, you're
Aye.
approving the motion, thank you, yes.
gone.
Bill is gone. Cindy?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Lauren? Aye. George?
Yes.
Angela?
Aye.
Peter?
Yes.
Caitlin? Tom?
Yes.
Diane? Howard?
Yeah, yeah.
For all that, yeah.
Howard?
Lovely young lady.
Thank you. Chris? Thank you, Howard. Chris?
Yes.
And Mike?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that patience.
Thank you.
And Howard said this worked out really well.